Hey guys, Corey Ogilvy here. Today we're going to go over 9 principles of shot composition for video and photo. I want to emphasize that it doesn't matter if you're video or photo, these principles apply evenly. If you're an editor, it's super important that you understand the principles of shot composition because that will help you curate and edit the very best shots possible. There's also a bonus principle at the end, a 10th principle, which is for video only. Photographers, I suggest you watch because you'll actually see a little bit about video and you'll learn what differentiates it from photo at a really fundamental level. So how do you define shot composition? I actually looked on Google and the definitions, in my opinion, were quite inadequate. If you look, you'll see they're kind of confusing. You know, one of them uses this fancy word mise-en-scene, which is, you have to go to film school to know what that means. Nobody just goes on Google and hey, I woke up today and I want to see what mise-en-scene means, right? Don't be pretentious, just be really, really simple. And direct, right? And so my working definition is shot composition is the strategic arrangement of elements in a video or photo shot. That's it. It's strategic because you have a strategy behind it. You're not just willy-nilly shooting. You actually have a process by which you filter the visual data that you're getting, and then you execute a shot. Okay, so let's jump in and look at the 9 principles of shot composition, plus the bonus one for video. The 9 principles of shot composition fall into 2 main categories. The first category is background. The second category is framing. Before we go into it though, I just want to show you, because this is a, take out this little piece, because this is a brand new card that I made. I'll show you a graphic of it. But basically this is something that I used to coach the shooters at my wedding company, Glimmer Films. And I just gave this to them. It has this little cutout so that they can see the principles while they look through the frame to compose their image. I'm not sure, we might have these for sale in the bottom description of the video. I'm not sure if we're even going to be able to, so I'll give the plug now just in case. Let us know if you want one. They're pretty cool. They cost a lot to make actually, but once you get them, they're really durable. I made it like as thick as a credit card. So the first principle of composition in the background category is symmetry. Now, symmetry is a design principle this involves graphic design, not just photo and video. And there's always opportunities in any situation to compose your image with symmetry. You just have to be an opportunist, right? You have to be strategic. You have to look. The second principle of shot composition is depth. Now, depth is 3-dimensional, right? So that's when you're able to show a long distance behind your subject. And the more objects you have in that distance, the more depth is connoted, right? It's the more it feels 3-dimensional. So you'll see in films a lot that, you know, the filmmakers go to great depths to always frame in lots of depth in the background, and so should you. The third principle of shot composition is balance. This takes a lot of nuance. A lot of people instinctually will try to, bulk their subject and the background objects together. Sometimes when you put a little bit of space between your subject and the background object, what happens is you get this beautiful balancing effect in the image. Your subject is still prominent, they're still noticeable, but the background object has its own place and it gives a balanced weight to the composition. As an editor, really fish these out. And if you shoot, really try to get them. It takes a little extra work because it's kind of a counterintuitive thing sometimes, but try to balance out the objects and subjects in your frame. The fourth principle of shot composition is leading lines, and I love this one. Again, it's a very nuanced one. You have to really think about it or else you can kind of miss it in the real world. But leading lines are effectively when there's lines that lead into your subject in a flattering way. Again, you have to be nuanced here. You don't want a line leading into their head. That looks really bad. But you do want lines that lead the eye towards the subject, not away from the subject. But if you don't think about it, you're gonna totally miss it. And that's why it is strategic, right? You have to go into a shoot with this in mind. And that's why I have this card, right? Because if you forget, like just looking at it and looking through it, I can instantly just look down and I can see the reminder of leading lines. Now, the fifth principle of shot composition is separation. Now, separation can be achieved in three fundamental ways. You can achieve it with bokeh, so you can have your subject in focus and the background out of focus. You can achieve separation with light, with brightness basically, right? So you can have your subject in the foreground lit, and then you can have the background being really, really dark. Finally, you can achieve separation with color. So, the lighting can be completely flat. The bokeh, there can be no bokeh, right? But if your subject is really green and it's a really red background, that's separation. If the subject is green and the background is green, that's not separation. So then you're gonna wanna use one of the other techniques like bokeh or lightness. Separation, as you can see, it has its own kind of little series of sort of criteria. And really, the most typical one is bokeh, right? It's pretty easy because you just kind of get your thing in focus and the background's blurry. I would say the most nuanced of the three is color, right? Strategically placing your subject so the background color complements the color of them. That's incredible cinematography. As a shooter, aim for it, and as an editor, hunt for it. The sixth principle and the final principle of the background category is lighting. So that's a pretty big one, right? And we could do a whole video about lighting. I'm just gonna say a couple principles of lighting now. You can just look at me right now and see that there's effectively what I call the 3/4, 1/5 principle. So I'm trying to get 3/4 light to about here, and then I'm trying to get 1/5 harder light over here. And I'm trying to have like a dark band right here. I don't know if I'm correct when I'm pointing this out, but that general principle, I always tell my shooters at Glimmer Films, my wedding company, I always tell them, guys, just open windows, whatever you gotta do to just get the 3/4, 1/5. So now we're into the second category of shot composition, which is framing. The seventh principle of shot composition is depth of field. Depth of field is something you wanna decide after you've locked your frame. You wanna figure out how much bokeh that's the blur, right? How much do I want behind my subject? I usually save that till one of the last questions I ask. That heavily impacts how your shot looks. Now we're gonna do another tutorial probably that goes a little bit more in depth into the relationship between depth of field and bokeh and lens type and aperture. Those are kind of four fundamental things you need to understand to have a full control over bokeh and depth of field. The eighth principle of shot composition is perspective. Now this one is really interesting. I remember a few years ago, I was training a shooter in a wedding, and we were at a reception, and I was like, okay, shoot some decor, shoot this table here, like shoot the utensils and plates and stuff. And he walked up, he set up his tripod, and he angled down, and he shot like the cutlery and everything. And I asked him, I said, well, could this be better? And he was like, I don't know how. And I said, well, just lower your tripod down to the level of the table so that you're, filming across the table with depth in the background, right? And he did that, and there was bokeh, and we could see depth, and we could see all the people moving in the background. The shot was 100 times better. And the fundamental question there is perspective, right? You always want to ask when you're doing a shot, can this be lower? Should this be higher? Don't take for granted that every shot needs to be at eye level. In fact, if every shot is at eye level, as an editor, that's torturous, right? I mean, you have the same perspective on every shot. It just gets really repetitive. So that's why you'll see professional photographers, really good ones, they're always laying down, they're always on their knees, they're always in awkward positions. The ninth and final principle of shot composition is rule of thirds. Now, rule of thirds is pretty well known, even if you're new to video or photo. Philip White did this incredible tutorial series online. He's a wedding videographer, and he comes to mind when I think of rule of thirds because he actually has a free tutorial on his site which shows his little segment that he did on rule of thirds, and he shows a hack, and it's a hack that saves you time shooting. And he said, what you should do is just remove the two horizontal lines so that you're left with just two vertical lines, and effectively you have three boxes, right? And he says, just put your subject in one of the three boxes. Make sure that they're not intersecting the line. Make sure that they have a home in one of the three boxes. The 10th bonus principle, which is for video only, but photo you should watch as well because you'll see some pretty cool things. It's parallax. Now parallax is that three-dimensional movement in two-dimensional video shots. It's easy for us to forget, but film is two-dimensional. Ultimately, the output of film is a two-dimensional screen. The way three-dimension is implied is through parallax, right? And so parallax is when you have the camera moving, and if you have objects in the shot, if an object is moving faster, that implies that the object is closer to the camera. As a human being, neurologically, we conclude that. And then the object that's moving slow, that is layered behind the faster moving object, again, we conclude that that is further away. That's a fundamental thing that differentiates film from photo, right? Photo is completely incapable of showing parallax. It's just intrinsic to the art form. And so with film, it's a super important principle. You don't want to overdo it, you don't want to underdo it, but if you watch, I challenge you, the next movie you watch, just see how many times that the filmmakers intentionally put objects in the foreground that move when the camera dollies, because that movement implies three dimension, it implies depth. So thanks for watching, guys. That's the fundamental shot composition principles that I wanted to share with you today. As an editor, hopefully that makes you better. As well, check out our AI plugin, Shakefree, that we just released, which makes things easier for editors. It gets rid of a lot of the ugly shake. It's basically a digital assistant editor. Something we worked on a lot, so we hope that you use it, give us feedback, and we hope to see you back soon. Thanks so much for watching.